It's the year ending Saturday the 31st of December 2022, and this is the Year Unwrapped. In the past 12 months, we've seen war in Europe, with Russia mounting a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, 3 prime ministers in Britain, with Boris Johnson and then Liz Truss stepping down, and the death of Queen Elizabeth II at the age of 96, and after 70 years on the throne. But we're here to consider some of the trends that passed under the radar this week, big changes that haven't made headlines, but are slowly affecting the way we live our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the year. And joining me today from the week's digital team is Jamie Timson from refugee podcast Integrate That. It's Abdulwahab Tahhan, and we welcome back the host of the international affairs podcast One Decision, Julia Macfarlane. Jamie, it's the end of the year. Are you a link your arms, auld lang syne sort of guy? How do you spend New Year's Eve?
I am. Well, after my good friend Grant Shapps rudely turned down my invitation to join me this New Year's Eve, I will be in...
You're not on the Christmas card list?
I'm not.
After what you said.
Absolutely. Well, there'll be... Who knows? 2023 could be the year that there's a rapprochement in relations between Shapps and Timson, but we'll see. I am going to be in Dunkeld, lovely Dunkeld in Scotland, dancing the night away at a pub with live music, I believe. So that'll be me in my glad rags.
Do those glad rags include thermals, or now you've moved to Glasgow, have you gone native and you just turn up in a skirt?
It's just a t-shirt, actually. Yeah, it's a t-shirt and some shorts. I'm away.
Okay, I think we're all grateful for that insight. Abdul, you're kicking us off. What do you think this year should be remembered for?
It is the year where white people became refugees.
Yeah, well, just to put it bluntly, these are not refugees from Syria. These are refugees from neighboring Ukraine. I mean, that, quite frankly, is part of it. These are Christians, they're white, they're very similar to many people who live in Poland.
NBC News correspondent Kelly Kobiela reporting in February. Abdul, remind us of the context. What was happening then?
So 24th of February, the Russian invasion kicks in Ukraine, and a large number of people leave Ukraine to neighboring countries, and they become, by default, refugees. They seek refuge in other countries. And then the media was trying to cover all of that, and they were shocked that these refugees, this wave of refugees, couldn't be whiter. I mean, it was so white that they really needed to wear sunglasses sometimes, and they couldn't really believe it. They were saying, like, they have blue eyes, they are blonde. It's like, wait a second, I'm a refugee, I'm from Syria, and my eyes are green. These people are Christians. We have a lot of Christians in a lot of churches back in Syria. But the fact that these were white people, that was the thing that a lot of journalists could not really process, that white people can actually be refugees, and actually anyone in the world can be a refugee. Being a refugee is not about the color of your skin, but it's about the situation in your country.
And so what's the impact been of that realization, if you're right?
The impact is that these people are now guests in other countries, and they should not be treated as refugees just like we treat the Syrian refugees or the Iraqi refugees. And we've seen a lot of schemes to help these people get a very good start, which is great. As a refugee, I think these initiatives that I think we're going to talk about them in today's podcast are great, but they should be applied to every single refugee, not to just people who are white and look like some of us.
Okay, so Julia, just to talk over what some of those benefits were. So EU governments granted Ukrainians temporary protection, including documentation, financial support, access to the labour market, residency, education, stuff which is far from guaranteed if you're a refugee from elsewhere.
Right. I mean, I don't know if anyone has taken a flight out of the UK recently, but the infrastructure supporting Ukrainians was so quick. In Heathrow, there were so many sort of welcome boards, arrival boards for Ukrainians, signs for where they should go when they've arrived in the UK. And I mean, I think it's so great that Abdul has suggested this story, because one thing that struck me and that struck so many people is seeing the response to the Ukrainians, the warm, generous and righteous response to these people who had their country invaded by Russia in February. It must have been awful as a Syrian to see the disparity between how the Ukrainians were welcomed by Europe versus how Syrian refugees continue to be treated nearly 10 years into that conflict. And I mean, this story reminds me of an advert that Save the Children ran in 2014 that tried to highlight this. And it was in the style of those 1 second a day videos. And it started with a white girl's birthday party. And it was a day in the life. And it showed, what it would look like if a war erupted in Bradford or Liverpool or wherever. And so they sort of dramatized this girl's life changing. And it was to sort of show that we don't think of refugees as being people who can look and be like us. And the fact that we do should mean very little, if anything at all.
I don't want to just straight up buy this argument, Jamie, that it was about a majority white population in countries like the UK feeling more of a bond for refugees from Ukraine because they're majority white too. Could it actually just be that they're Europeans? I mean, there were some clumsy comments by newscasters, but actually they're Europeans and they're facing a war, and that's not something that we've been used to hearing about. And that's the identification that people had. It doesn't matter about their religion or their skin colour.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination, as with a lot of things, it's a combination of all of what we've said earlier. I think one of the things that really struck me about this is the role of the media and the fact that, the media, we're not, speaking as part of the media, not independent or objective observers anymore. And so when something like a Russian invasion causes this level of refugees, it's very easy. It fits into the narrative that we want to put across of the aggressor is Russia, the kind of pronounced enemy of the liberal West. But when potentially Western involvement is causing refugees in situations in the Middle East or Africa, there's kind of a kind of information silence from the media's perspective a bit more, because it doesn't fit into this narrative of like, and it goes all the way through not just the media but the political establishment. This kind of like bombastic, why was Boris so celebrated? It was because he stood up to Russia for the Ukrainians, and yet it doesn't exist when it comes to Yemen, say, or it doesn't exist when it comes to the wars that the UK have been a part of in the Middle East. And I think basically it's a media perspective that we're looking through, and the media can't be free of judgment.
There was plenty of outrage, wasn't there, Jamie, about the Afghans who couldn't get their flights as the country was being taken over by the Taliban. I wouldn't say that wasn't a position taken by the media.
How long did that last for? That was basically like 2.5, 3 weeks maybe of front page news. And it was mainly about people like Dominic Raab sitting on the beach and not dealing with it. The kind of Ukrainian refugee crisis, as we've seen, it has lasted in the front pages for a really long time. And I mean, Afghanistan is a very specific issue because of the role that the UK has played, but there has just been way more media attention on these refugees than there has been on other types of refugees.
Okay, I mean, Julia was speculating, Abdul, about how Syrian refugees might feel about it. So, here you are. How did you feel about it?
First of all, there are a couple of things that I felt that were great to have as a country. That the UK pulled a lot of schemes, like Home for Ukrainian scheme, where the government encouraged people to host Ukrainian refugees for up to 6 months, which is a great scheme that we did not have as Syrians when I first arrived. When you fly into any UK airport, you see signs of welcoming and telling you that you don't have to pay to go to the city center. You can take the National Express for free. But Syrians don't arrive in planes, right? We arrive on boats. So I think the Home Office is ready to pick us up to whatever detention center they have up in Kent or somewhere else. Another scheme is that the government had is to have a family reunion. So you can bring your family to the UK. Now, I'm a British citizen now, and I cannot bring my family to the UK because I don't meet the threshold that's set up for that.
Yes, but you're also speaking to us now from Turkey. Turkey's taken in the most number of Syrian refugees, and that was because basically Syrians are mostly Muslims and Turkey's next door. So, I mean, that is exactly the same argument we're just hearing, isn't it? You know, these people are Christians and they're next door. I mean, that is exactly the same argument that was being made for European countries taking in Ukrainians.
Yes, the only difference is that the UK created a lot of legal channels for Ukrainian refugees to fly into the UK or to come into the UK, where Turkey did not do that. And the UK did not create and is not willing to create these legal channels for anyone to claim asylum outside the UK. And the only way to come to the UK is by boat. And when they come, you know, we've seen the language that these refugees are accused of being enemy or invaded. So the thing is, when the UK wants to create legal channels for people to claim asylum, they would do it, and which is great. And they were helping these Ukrainian refugees, which is great because these people need the help they needed and that they got. But the UK government should provide legal routes for everyone to claim asylum, not only for these Ukrainian refugees. But I do feel that Syrian refugees 10 years ago were the Ukrainian refugees now. And the Afghans and Pakistanis were looking at us like, oh, these Syrian refugees are getting a better treatment. We were housed better. Our applications were processed better. My application took only 7 weeks from the first time I called the Home Office to receiving my paper in my hand. Only 7 weeks. So it's one wave after another. One wave after another. One people get a better treatment and another group get ostracized.
I suppose as well, Julia, if it is about how people perceive different groups of migrants, again, it's maybe easier to relate when you see Kyiv being bombed and it looks like European cities that we live in, than it is 10 years into another conflict in a very different kind of geography, in a very different kind of landscape, particularly the Middle East, where every country is at war with someone.
Right. I mean, it certainly helps us to visualize because most of us do not get to see the scenes with our own eyes. I mean, one thing that I think is really interesting is that there are only going to be more and more refugees in the coming decades. And that's not necessarily refugees out of conflict, but refugees out of the climate crisis. And increasingly, those refugees are going to look like people from all over the world. I read recently that there could be more than 1 billion climate refugees by 2050. I mean, if you are living in California and you can't get wildfire insurance on your house and you have to move, that makes you a refugee. If you move to a different area, if you move to a different country, you can be an internally displaced migrant. And this idea that people are moving to different places in order to safeguard their livelihoods, their families' safety, this is something that we're going to see more and more of. And so this unfortunate fact that it has sort of taken a war in Europe for a lot of people to realize, you know, refugees are people who need our help. They don't need to be discriminated against. They shouldn't be alienated. It is hopefully a good thing, but we mustn't forget that the Syrian war is still going on. There are still, the Assad regime is still firing on last rebel-held areas in Aleppo and places that are still being killed in that war. And, you know, we haven't heard anything about the civil war in Syria this year.
Well, so this is it. There's a wariness, isn't there, that comes naturally when wars drag on and on. And Jamie, it's obviously quite possible that might be the case in Ukraine as well. I mean, in a year's time, if it's still happening, that Russia is bombing towns in Ukraine, will people in Britain and other countries like us be just as sympathetic as they have been this year to refugees? Or will people take more of a stance of, well, you can identify which areas are safe and which aren't, and it's a shame there's a war going on, but we can't help everybody?
And I think that the problem or the worry about fatigue in terms of the Western response is a crucial one. And it's why we see like Zelensky going over to America last week to Washington to try and, keep the drum up and keep the drumbeat going of support for the Ukraine. I think also, I know people that have housed Ukrainian refugees in the UK. I know, and having spoken to Ukrainian refugees who do want to go home and have tried to go home once and then come back, it does put obviously a lot of pressure onto families that are taking people on, UK families that are taking on Ukrainian refugees, because you want to leave your house open for them to return. Sometimes you go back, it doesn't work, you come back, that's all possible. I would say that one of the big differences is that they're being offered, £350 a month to house these people, whereas asylum seekers generally only get about £40 a week to live on from other places. I just also want to point out that like this year has also seen a lot of criminalization of people that are helping non-Ukrainians. In Italy, we saw the Juventa trial take place this year, which is about a kind of NGO that saved a lot of refugees in just south of Italy who are basically being put on trial for facilitating people smuggling. So it's not only that you're getting preferential treatment for Ukrainian refugees, you're also seeing a lot of criminalization within Europe of people who are helping non-Ukrainian refugees. And I think that's really shocking.
I mean, finally on this, Abdul, you brought this story to our attention as something from this year that's changed people engaging with white refugees. Do you think ultimately it's a positive or a negative? I mean, I can understand the sense of hypocrisy, but is it actually, a good thing that people relate to refugees regardless?
I think it's a great thing. It's a great thing to see that the sympathy of people, that it's still there. People are still supporting each other. There's a lot of support in the UK for Ukrainian refugees, normalizing the word refugees, seeing people. When I go, sometimes people don't believe me that I'm a refugee because I don't look like the stereotype that they have of a refugee and like someone who has, for example, a smartphone. So now seeing, white people from Ukraine being refugees, that breaks the stereotypes a little bit. That makes it better. And I was really proud of the effort that the UK have put. And I really wish that they can extend it to welcome all the other refugees, not from Ukraine, but other areas of the world.
Okay. Julia, you're up next after this. Okay, Julia, your turn. What does Miss International Affairs reckon 2022 should be remembered for?
2 NATO allies getting very close to open hostilities.
We will leave this demand to the discretion of the international community, but using these islands that have non-military status for various exercises and trying to use NATO and other countries to be a part of this unlawfulness will only end in disaster. We've run out of patience. We are not joking.
President Erdogan in full President Trump-style regalia there, baseball cap and everything, talking to the military in December. Julia, what's the story?
So this has been a long-standing issue between the Turks and the Greeks, and it goes back quite a few years. But just to quickly sum up the latest what's happening is that the Turks are unhappy with the fact that the Greeks are apparently militarizing these islands in the Aegean Sea, which is something that the Turks are taking to be a direct threat. Now, Turkey and Greece, they're neighbors. There are, I think, hundreds, if not thousands, of little islands and islets in the Aegean Sea, and the majority of them belong to Greece. And the thing is, these Greek islands and islets, a lot of them go right up to the Turkish coastline. In some cases, there are some Greek islands that are only 5 miles away from the Turkish mainland.
Yeah, if you look at these on a map, you would think, I mean, genuinely, impartially, you would assume that they were Turkish islands, wouldn't you? And a lot of the islands that we're talking about here are islands that British holidaymakers are familiar with as Greek islands. Kos, Santorini, Mykonos.
Rhodes, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because before I looked into this story, I assumed that they were sort of roughly shared between the two. But no, I mean, the vast majority of them do belong to Greece. And the Aegean Islands have been part of Greece for thousands of years. And in fact, the name Aegean comes from the ancient Greek word for the sea, and that word was archipelagos, which now is a word used to describe any group of islands together in the sea. And so their claim is a long one, but it's difficult because, there was a war between Italy and the Turks ahead of the First World War, and the Italians took a bunch of Aegean islands from the Ottomans. They occupied them, and at the end there was the Treaty of Lausanne. And one of the things in the Treaty of Lausanne, it involved the Turks renouncing their claims to these islands that the Italians had occupied. And so those islands, and some of those include Rhodes and some really big islands, actually very close to the Turkish.
Okay, so there is a long history and we can go back, hundreds of years. But actually, why is this happening? If Turkey's right, why is Greece militarizing the Aegean Islands?
So under these various treaties, the islands are not meant to be militarized. That's how they have sort of tried to sort of make peace with this dispute. Now, the Greeks say that as long as there remains a Turkish military threat in the Aegean Islands, there is going to be no demilitarization. And this is all about the Turkish invasion of Cyprus, which still weighs very heavily in the minds of the Greeks, even though it's been 50 years. And that's back when the Turks invaded Cyprus in the 70s under a pretext of protecting Turkish Cypriots. And what happened recently was the Turks were actually carrying out a NATO exercise. And what they said was that some of their F-16s were harassed by the Greeks and were even tracked by an S-300 air defense system. Those are surface-to-air missiles. And the Turks claim that the Greeks were tracking their fighter jets as they were carrying out a NATO mission of reconnaissance in the area. And the Greeks deny this and say that's not what's happening. The Turks are really trying to inflame the system. But Turkey is basically saying, they've been sending drones over a lot of these islands saying, look, there are all of these armored vehicles, there are these battleships in the island of Lesbos. This goes against a lot of these treaties, and we are not going to stand for it.
Okay, I mean, Abdul, for Erdogan, Cyprus is a vote winner, isn't it, in Turkey? It's good to look strong on Cyprus and kind of know that the war isn't going to get reignited, but you can play tough. Is it as simple as that? Like the election was coming and he was like, we'll talk about protecting Cyprus, and then it's got a bit out of hand?
Well, the election is going to be really tough this year. It's one of the toughest elections that Erdogan is facing. He's pulling all the cards. He's even pulling the card of normalizing the situation with Syria and meeting Assad, which he's never talked about for a long, long time. The Secretary of Interior Affairs also talked about the possible return of Syrian refugees. So they're trying to really pull all the cards for this really important election that's coming up next year, maybe in May or in June. It's not decided yet. But looking tough is something Erdogan has been, praised for a long, long time. And this claim is one of for these small islands around Turkey. It's a matter of kind of an identity for a lot of people in here. The Turkish identity, national Turkish identity, is very, very strong. Whenever there's a small attack on a Turkish person or an attack on a Turkish identity anywhere. I remember a couple of years ago, there was a dispute with Holland. So we saw a lot of Turkish people taking an orange and stabbing it. I think that a couple of clips went viral. So Turkish national identity is really very, very strong. So any claim that would make it come to the surface or boost it would definitely give Erdogan a boost in this election.
I mean, Jamie, have you got a sense of who you think started this? if we don't go back as far as the Turks taking northern Cyprus, but actually just this year, whose fault's this?
I think it's. I'm going to put my neck on the line, not hopefully literally, and go for Turkey. I think the context of this whole dispute is really about the kind of move that Turkey has made under Erdogan away from Europe and away from the kind of West, and the tolerance of NATO in letting Turkey, like we saw, buying missiles from Russia, and the kind of, I think next year or in the year ahead, we really will see a kind of, if Erdogan wins again, I know that's not looking hugely certain, we'll see a further kind of move away from the EU. Certainly, accession talks with Turkey have completely ground to a halt, despite what we were saying in the EU referendum in 2016. It's looking even less likely that that Turkey will join the EU. There is a real part of this that really that says that Russia will look at two NATO members fighting each other and think like, oh, here's a kind of gap that we can exploit. And if that means, potential involvement in places like Bosnia, where Russia already has quite a strong links with Serbia, and Turkey continue to stand by, because Turkey's seen as a mediator at the moment. But if Turkey moves ever closer to, or ever further away from the West, we could be in real trouble geopolitically.
And as you mentioned in your trail to this story, Julia, they're both NATO allies, Greece and Turkey. I mean, is this just sort of embarrassing that they're on the one hand representing NATO and on the other hand have this long-running conflict with each other?
I mean, it's very obviously really sticky ground for NATO. And the Secretary General has really, I mean, everyone is trying not to get involved in this because it's like a brotherly, neighborly sort of spat between the two, and no one can sort of tell them to sort it out. I mean, recently Jens Stoltenberg said that Turkey and Greece had to resolve their disagreements over the Aegean Sea. You know, he said, diverse views and debate are an essential part of our democracies, but we urge Greece and Turkey to solve their differences in the Aegean Sea in a spirit of trust and allied solidarity. Essentially just telling them to sort it out like grown-ups. But it is difficult. And certainly, you know, Abdul's right to point out that Erdogan is facing an election next year, even if he has managed to successfully throw his biggest rival in jail, the mayor of Istanbul. So he at least has one less thing to worry about hampering his chances. But, you know, I mean, I find him a fascinating character because he's also sort of taking quite a leading role in getting involved in the Ukraine and Russia dispute. He has even gone so far as saying that Ukraine should have all of its boundaries restored, including Crimea. I mean, he's an interesting guy. He is obviously hugely problematic in the areas of human rights, but he is becoming more and more of an international figure who is becoming harder for us all to ignore.
Do you think there is a chance, Abdul, that it could flare up again properly between Turkey and Greece?
I don't think so. There are these small incidents like here and there. And it's like in October, I think in September and October, there was the Greek border guards attacked a cargo ship and fired at them. And then later, the Turkish border guards attacked a migrant boat going to Greece. And the Greek border guards saved them. A couple of months later, before the Greek border guards kicked some refugees back to Turkey and stripped them naked. And they always fight against each other, but these are very little and insignificant incidents. I don't think they will flare up. This is just a show they're putting or something they enjoy, but it's not going to really blow up. Turkey has bigger fish to fry, especially in the southern borders with Syria, with the Kurds. So looking west is I don't think it's going to be a serious fight.
It's probably best that not too many people do throw a light on this, though, Jamie, don't you think, given that tourism is such an important part of the economy, particularly for Cyprus? I mean, you know, people haven't really noticed that the war of words has amped up a bit. But I mean, it's very clear when you go to Cyprus. I went at Easter time, and there's a strong British connection there, obviously, because there's an army base there from the UK. That the Turks and the Greeks really do hate each other there. Like, it's still very much in the air. And, you know, whereas most British holidaymakers would be just as comfortable going to Northern Cyprus or Southern Cyprus, wouldn't really think about it.
It's good for the listeners to hear where you go on your holidays, Ollie. I've always thought that's important. I think it's good to connect with them. I totally agree. I think it's interesting when you talk about the islands that Julia was mentioning, and you just think, God, yeah, those are all on the boards of London Luton Airport. When you go there. So, I mean, obviously tourism plays a massive role. And I went to Istanbul this year for the first time and had like a really amazing experience. One of the best cities I've ever been to. Insert snarky comment from me here about caring where you go on holiday. But, you know, we could have met up somewhere in between the two, couldn't we?
What's important is, regardless who's running it, halloumi of some kind is available. We'll be coming to you, Jamie, to finish off the year after this. Finally this year, Jamie, what do you think the last 12 months should really be remembered for?
This was the year it was all about hearsay. Pure and simple.
Spitgate has come to a close. Chris Pine's rep is denying that Harry Styles spat on his Don't Worry Darling co-star at the Venice Film Festival. Footage of the pair sitting down for the Don't Worry Darling premiere appeared to show Styles spitting on Pine. The video generated millions of views on Twitter and other social media sites, with fans wondering what exactly was going on in the clip.
The Hollywood Reporter there discussing what was apparently termed the Don't Worry Darling scandal back in September. Jamie, are you going to actually explain what the Don't Worry Darling scandal was? Because I feel like we'll be here all day. Or is the story something else?
I think Forget refugees, forget the Aegean Sea. This year has been all about gossip. And Don't Worry, Darling is an excellent example of gossip and scandal. And basically, I won't praise it. It's worth going to look it up yourself if you get a chance. But basically, it involved Florence Pugh, Harry Styles.
You need to carve half an hour out of your day.
Oh, I mean, it's well worth your life getting into it, because it is very interesting. All about the dynamic between Olivia Wilde and Harry Styles and Jason Sudeikis, and then obviously Chris Pine and Florence Pugh. There's just everything you could want from a celebrity gossip scandal comes from Don't Worry, Darling. And you can read all about it on theweek.co.uk. Just put theweek.co.uk space Don't Worry, Darling into Google, and you'll find the article that we wrote about it back in September. Never knowingly off-brand.
I'm sure it's beautifully summarised. But it's not new, is it?
No.
Gossip isn't new, is it? It's been a thing for centuries. What's different about this story and this year in particular?
So this year we've seen a real resurgence in celebrity gossip, and a lot of people are attributing it to the fact that this has been the first year when we've kind of shaken off the pandemic and we've got back into chatting together, getting back together to really getting to chat about the important stuff, which tends to be gossip. To give some examples...
a story about someone spitting on someone can have a comic frisson.
Exactly, yeah.
As opposed to presaging a medical emergency.
For example, just two big success stories this year has been Demoir, which is a social media account where you or I or anyone can post kind of anonymous tip-offs about celebrities. Generally, it's about interactions that they have with that kind of normal people have with celebrities, and they explain, and then this anonymous woman will put it up on a Instagram account that has 1.7 million followers currently as an example. Today's one was about celebrities that told members of the public not to look at them. Either they went into restaurants and they told wait staff they couldn't look them in the eye, or crew that they were working on. And it's just like lists of names being like, X said they couldn't look at me. And it is quite, what's the word? I guess interesting. I guess it's interesting. It draws you in. So that's been a massive success this year. And then we've also seen things like the Normal Gossip podcast, which has been a big success, which is basically just a podcast of the best gossip that you've heard that you're not involved in. So I would go to you, Olly, and I'd say, tell me about a messy drama from one of your friends' lives. I don't know them. Hit me up. And then you'd tell me, and now it's in a podcast. So it's well worth listening to that as well.
I mean, Jamie's making it all sound like light relief, Julia, and I do see that argument, especially when the news is so heavy. You know, you just want a diversion from all that stuff. But it is real people's lives that are being gossiped about, people with families and parents and children.
Yeah, I mean, I think the trouble with gossip is, you know, it can be defamatory. It can be a form of bullying. And that's even with normal people. You know, office gossip can be very corrosive. And don't forget, I think also another thing that's been huge this year is the dominance of royal family gossip. And, you know, but it's also a media story as well. I feel like, you know, this is becoming increasingly sort of mainstream news articles migrating out of the Daily Mail sidebar of shame. And while we're on the subject of the royal family, it is interesting that the royal family is probably one of the only patches in journalism that doesn't apply to any of our journalism rules, you know, because everything is gossip. There are no smoking guns, all the, you know, nothing but anonymous sources. It's all he says, she says, the kind of reporting that would never make the mark on any other sort of topic. But, you know, it's been huge this year. And I think Netflix announced that the Harry and Meghan documentary broke all streaming records for 2022. But I think it's interesting because a lot of this sort of celebrity actory gossip, you know, as someone whose partner works in the industry.
In the gossip industry?
In the acting industry, in the film industry, but it is an industry that thrives on gossip, and part of it is necessary because, you know, you get these jobs and you have to take them, especially if you're an actor, most of the time, and so you never know who you're getting onto a film location in the middle of nowhere with, and a lot of the time people talk about what other people are like to work with. But these Instagram accounts are taking that and making it available to everybody, not just people in that industry.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose more broadly, Abdul, over the last, say, decade, we've seen some advantage to gossip in that sense, haven't we? I suppose crystallized by the Me Too movement. You know, you've seen the opportunity for people to out someone as being a sexual harasser, or someone was inappropriate, or someone crossed a line in a way that would have been seen as gossip previously to that. People would say, well, where's the evidence? Now, if 100 people all say he did this to me, people tend to believe it.
Yeah, true. But the only difference with the Me Too movement is that it was not really a secret or a gossip. It was something that everybody knew. Nobody wanted to bring it forward. Similar to the documentary I watched on Netflix about Jimmy Savile, right? A lot of people raised the alarm around him. Nobody wanted to do anything. So that's the difference between gossip and where it's going to get you, and nobody wanting to actually do anything. But if you want to look at the gossip and the use of gossip, the only difference is now that we have Instagram accounts where we can watch Rooney and Vardy, fighting against each other about who leaked what to the Daily Mail. But if you want to trace gossip back in history, Shakespeare used a lot of gossip in his work. A lot of the characters in one of his plays, Much Ado About Nothing, the characters learn about each other through gossip. You know, they know someone is listening to them, so they pretend that they don't know this character is here, and they say, "Oh, I love Beatrice," and then they go to Beatrice, and "Oh, this guy loves you," and then she breaks up with her future husband, and she goes to love someone else. That's in a lot of Shakespeare's work, and that was all the gossip. It helped people find partners or avoid partners back in 16 something. But nowadays we have Instagram, luckily, in order to find out about that.
Yeah, but the difference there, Jamie, as opposed to 400 years ago, is that there's a natural human instinct, isn't there, to know your position in the tribe, to know what's going on all around you, to get the gossip of what's happening in your office or your community. But with social media, that's the whole world, and you can never keep on top of all of it, and it's quite exhausting. Like, you know, isn't it best not to try? It's quite unedifying, isn't it, to try and get the dirt on everybody, people you're never going to meet.
I think that's just you, Olly, with your elder statesman vibe. I think actually it's quite edifying to find out about. I think without religion in our lives now, gossip has the ability to act like parables or teachings for us to learn from. You know, we can look at something and say, this person acted in this way. Here's what I know about it.
Arguably acted in this way, allegedly acted in this way. You don't even know if it's true.
Yeah, but we didn't know anything about the Bible was true, but we still bloody did 2,000 years of us living our lives by it, didn't we? It's like we might as well use these as a teachings and learnings, because a lot of the enjoyment is out of putting yourself in that situation. You know, when I hear about someone or something that I don't know, and I hear about someone's done something or someone's gone mad or whatever, I'm like, oh, I wouldn't behave like that. Well, that's so interesting, because don't you think we should do this way? It's like, it's the best. It's the best way to converse with people.
I mean, Julia, Jamie had the temerity to make this about demography. I'm 41. But I do see that this is maybe something that is more accessible to people that are just kind of 10 years younger than me. I looked at that Demois Instagram account, and, you know, I know how to use Instagram. I was baffled. I didn't know what I was looking at. Like, it wasn't a picture of some gossip. It was like a meme. And then underneath, people commenting things that I didn't understand what they were saying. Is there a generational divide?
Well, but I think that's more a comment on how it's packaged, you know. So I might follow Demois on Instagram and, you know, look at what they're posting. But my mother, who is in her 60s, she will read the Daily Mail sidebar of shame, or, you know, read tabloids, and that's gossip. But what I find curious is, particularly with going back to the "Don't Worry, Darling," you know, so many of the sort of celebrity gossip stories, breakups, relationships, a lot of those are not true. A lot of those are publicity stunts. There was someone who went to a dinner with the boyfriend of a very famous singer, and he had revealed that actually a lot of her relationships were staged. They were staged for the publicity to help both of them gain traction in the media. And that is an open secret in the industry. And a lot of people, fans of both parties, don't seem to be aware of it. And so it's hard to know what is actually gossip or what is... It's hard.
Tell the listeners.
But it's hard to know if what you're reading is actually something that happened or may have happened, or is a tantalizing tale that has been planted by a savvy PR person. And with the "Don't Worry, Darling" thing, I mean, it certainly drove a huge amount of buzz. And perhaps if that was all concocted, perhaps this PR executive bit off more than they could chew. But one has to take it all with a huge grain of salt.
I mean, it is just exposing an ugly part of our personality, isn't it, Abdul? I mean, I do this. I see someone trending on Twitter, and first I think, oh no, are they dead? And then when I realise they're not dead, I do think, well, what have they done? I'm going to dig up and find out what they've done. Why are people talking about them? And, I mean, it's not really very fair to that actual real person.
It's not very fair, but when you put yourself in the public eye, then, you have to expect that. And at the end of the day, whatever, if you really care about your image and about what people are going to say, you shouldn't really put yourself in the public eye in the first place. And one of the reasons I really love First Amendment in the United States, that because you have the right to say whatever you want and to search for whatever you want. Maybe we don't have it in the UK in here. I saw the column of what's his name? Jeremy Clarkson? Was his name Jeremy Clarkson?
Jeremy Clarkson.
Yeah, Jeremy Clarkson. Saw his column. It was disgusting. I was really shocked that it was published, but it was. I think it would have been published in the U.S. anyway as part of free speech, and nobody would have argued against allowing this person to publish such a thing. So once you're in the public eye, I think everyone has the right to talk to you or discuss things about you.
Yeah, but it is really important not to libel people, isn't it, Jamie? I mean, that is something that you are trained to avoid.
You're talking to the wrong guy here, mate. No, it is very important not to libel people. And I do think there's also the question about no recourse, really. I think, a lot of the celebrities or the people involved in being kind of outed in Demois, it's not like, how sad would it be if they then replied on their story being like, this isn't true? People will be like, well, hey, why are you following? Like, why do you care? So there isn't much of a recourse at all. And I think what's interesting is that the generation that's kind of thriving under this whole Demois and the gossip one is the one that grew up knowing that like places like Heat magazine and Now magazine and OK and Us Weekly were all completely false, and they grew up knowing that like actually these were all really bad for everything. But ultimately there's still a desire for gossip and for about kind of the democratization of it. It is like taking back control of the celebrity gossip arena. It's what we voted for in 2016.
I mean, I do, just finally on this, I do find the relatability point quite interesting. Was it you, Julia, who was saying, people can relate to the Don't Worry Darling scandal? But they can't really because, they're not million-selling pop stars. I
think there is something that perhaps, speaks to people who have gone through a divorce, or they've, gone through affairs, or they've been bankrupted or whatever, to then read about celebrities, these people who are so venerated and idolized, having the same human experiences as everyone else. And it is hugely unedifying if you are that person to have all of your dirty laundry aired in the public eye. I mean, it must be hugely embarrassing. And, one can say, well, these people are paid for it. This is what they sign up to. But not everyone who is a celebrity it can end up being, in the public eye and discussed in this way. There was that parish town council that went viral on social media. Do you remember? And that Jackie, what's her name?
Jackie Weaver.
Partly people will read these things and think, celebrities are just like any one of us. But also we can all be subjects or targets of gossip. And, I think one of the reasons why I feel like the Daily Mail sidebar of shame is called the sidebar of shame because we're always ashamed when someone spots us reading it, because it is tricky to navigate. None of us really want to be seen as being too involved in it. We all want to be seen to be above gossip and rumor, but it is a sort of guilty pleasure that a lot of people succumb to.
It's also, Abdul made reference to the Jeremy Clarkson column, Jamie. I don't know if that's gossip, but it does show the kind of he said, she said stuff, like talking about what people said has now become the main news agenda. That is a shift, isn't it? It's getting closer to the United States in that way. Do you think we're going to see more gossipy stories next year being the news?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that we've seen, with things like the Partygate scandal, we've seen politics like severely affected by what's going on behind closed doors, and people being like hugely interested in what people are getting up to when they're deciding the laws. And it's interesting that, you know, in France, it was always the case, wasn't it, that you could do anything as a public figure behind closed doors, and they didn't really care. That's me slandering France, just to round off the year. But in the UK, we kind of always thought it was fair game. And I think we are moving further towards that. I think you're right. I think in 2023, there will be a lot more about what people are saying behind closed doors and what it says about the people in power. I think that's probably a good thing, but I guess we'll wait and see.
Also, gossip is power. Gossip is powerful, and gossip is influence, and it's a kind of currency that you trade with other people, especially if it's in the office or among your social groups. And that is an aspect of human nature that goes back centuries, millennia.
Okay, well, with that, my thanks to Julia, Abdul, and Jamie. I'll leave you guys to go off and follow Demois. Thank you to you as well for listening. That is it for this episode of The Year Unwrapped, and also, therefore, for this year on the show. Thank you for following us. We know you have a choice of current affairs podcasts. We will be back with a fresh new year of weekly shows from Friday, the 6th of January. To get them delivered to your phone, just search The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts and tap follow. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Sophie King at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again in 2023, bye-bye.